Question number 4, Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by his statement that, quote, risks arising from Greece and China have receded somewhat and that there has been an improvement in the outlook for our trading partners? That is positive for the New Zealand outlook.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I stand by my full statement in the time it was made, and I'll alert the member to what that was, although he already knows. In response to a question about Treasury's advice on global risks, I said, quote, overall, Treasury concludes that risks arising from Greece and China have receded somewhat and there has been an improvement in the outlook for our trading partners. Of course, Mr Speaker, there are some indications that risks associated with China may in fact be growing rather than shrinking in the last week or two. We are reliant on the Chinese government's track record of being able to manage pretty difficult and challenging financial and economic circumstances. We've yet to see whether, for instance, they can push against the tide of a falling stock market, and then we'll find out whether that makes any difference to New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Did he challenge that advice from Treasury, given that he provided it to the House less than 2 weeks ago, on the same day that China had the largest devaluation of its currency since its modern exchange rate system was introduced, and in the same week that it was confirmed around 30% of the value of the Chinese share market had been lost?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, we're always debating these issues, not just with Treasury. In fact, I've had the opportunity to discuss them with the Chinese Minister of Finance, Mr Lou Jiwei, who indicated his own challenges in trying to understand exactly what was happening in the Chinese economy. The Chinese government has, like many other governments, taken extraordinary monetary and financial measures to keep growth going in their economy. At some stage, those measures will start unwinding. Who knows? It might be this week, but the markets may flatten out in the next few weeks, and it may be 6 months before it happens again. No one really knows.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Speaker, I asked a specific question about whether...
I listened very carefully to the answer. I think the question was addressed on this occasion. The member has further supplementaries. He can use them. Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
What reports of alternative strategies for the New Zealand economy has the Minister seen?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I see, unfortunately, 2 regular reports from a particular group who, on each headline that might be negative for the economy, panic, declare a crisis and demand all previous plans be changed and replaced. And I could give the House a clue as to who that particular group is, but they sit on the other side.
Order. It's not going to help the order of the House. Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Why did he make the comments about China's outlook being, quote, reasonably positive when data released the same week he made that comment saw an 8% drop year-on-year on exports from China and an 8% drop year-on-year in imports into China?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I said in the answer to my earlier question, I was asked around what reports we'd seen over these risks, and I quoted Treasury's most recent advice. Now, granted, they may not update it 2 hours ahead of every Chinese government data release, and these things seem to be moving pretty quickly recently. So, Mr Speaker, I'm happy to provide the member with an updated risk assessment on China. But as I said, having talked to the Finance Minister for China and listened to his concerns about how to assess exactly what's going on in that vast and complex economy, I'm somewhat sceptical that we'll be able to predict what's going to happen there.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he share the view of the Prime Minister that the slowdown in China is more of an issue for Australia than for New Zealand? And if so, does he not think that a slowdown in our biggest export market that is bad news for our second biggest export market might also be bad news for us?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I think yes and yes.
Supplementary question, Mr.
Supplementary
Speaker.
question, Grant Robertson.
Given that First Capital's assessment that New Zealand is at the risk of a recession in New Zealand has been heightened by slowing growth in China, the dairy price slump and stalling business confidence, does he still believe he doesn't need a Plan B for the New Zealand economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, in the first place, I don't necessarily agree with First NZ Capital's assessment of the probability of recession, but you know that's a matter for debate. And as I pointed out to the member, the government's following a plan at the heart of which is our ability to adapt to changing global circumstances. Now, the country isn't going to change its plans every single day that the Labor Party says there's a crisis. Like most people in New Zealand, the government takes a medium-term view of our economic prospects and behaves consistently with maximising those prospects. That's what many households and businesses today are doing, despite the fact that they've read headlines in the paper, which the Labor Party call a crisis, and everyone else sees as volatility in financial markets, which may or may not affect their business.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of that answer, why is he ignoring the calls of 75% of CEOs who responded to the Mood of the Boardroom survey, bank economists, federated farmers, all calling for a Plan B for the economy? Or is he just so arrogant that he thinks he's got it all right?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I think in the House last week, having chatted to one or two of the people claim to be calling for a Plan B, none of them could actually tell me what Plan B was. The government's plan is that if circumstances change significantly, then it would alter some policy settings as appropriate. And so we are monitoring what's happening in the global economy, but not losing sight of the fundamental stability required for this economy to thrive and to deliver jobs and more income to New Zealand households.
Order. Order. Question